Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished and esteemed members of Riksdag, ladies and gentlemen in attendance. I stand before you today not to speak of political abstractions or diplomatic courtesies. I am here before you to speak of a people, a great, ancient, and proud people who, at a deadly cost, are fighting for their freedom. What is happening now throughout Iran is not just an ordinary political dispute. It's not just a dispute between factions within a political system. This is something much deeper and more fundamental, a true and historic national reckoning between a civilization and the extremely ruthless regime that has occupied it. For a period of almost half a century, since the moment of its founding, the Islamic Republic has not behaved like an ordinary state among other states. It has operated as a revolutionary enterprise, exporting regional instability through its allies, subverting the sovereignty of its neighbors, fueling conflicts. From Baghdad to Beirut, from Sana'a to Damascus, and advancing its nuclear ambitions under a dense fog of denial. It has not sought a place in the community of nations. It has actively tried to completely destabilize this community. However, something irreversible has now changed inside Iran at this moment. The battle in my country today is not between reformists and hardliners, between occupation and liberation. It is a battle for the soul of a nation. What we are witnessing is not a fleeting protest movement. It is a generational revolt, the deepest uprising in Iran since 1979, uniting workers and students, women and minorities, various professionals and poets, renowned poets. And yes, even elements within the very bureaucratic state apparatus itself. Together, they have delivered their final verdict. This current political regime has definitively lost all of its legitimacy. In fact, it is a revolt against the revolution of 1979 itself, 1979. When legitimacy dies, the established power begins to crumble. The regime understands this situation very well. And that's exactly why it silences voices. It shuts down the internet and turns its weapons against citizens who are completely unarmed. And the cost has been devastating, a price that demands this noble chamber bear witness. Men and women are being massacred in the streets and in their homes. More than 40,000 Iranians were massacred in a single week. The regime's agents hunted down wounded protesters in hospitals and executed them in cold blood. Bodies were collected by garbage trucks. Families were forced to search among rows of body bags holding unidentified bodies. 40,000? That number is almost too big to comprehend, too abstract. That allows many people on the outside to see it as just a statistic. So let me tell you some of their names and stories. Consider the story of Hamid Mahdavi, the 30-year-old firefighter from Mashhad, who spent his last moments carrying injured protesters to safety. He ended up being shot and killed by the regime's repressive forces for the simple crime of saving lives. Think of Sina Kazemi, 22 years old. He was in his last semester at the engineering college. He had a lifelong passion for music and technology. He chose to fight for his and his nation's dignity. He was looking straight ahead. Security forces shot him in the back of the head. In Bushehr, Nurse Mansour Haidari and her husband, teacher Behruz Mansour, were shot dead side by side while protesting peacefully. They left behind two young children, aged 8 and 10, a family destroyed for dreaming of freedom. Negin Kadimi, a 28-year-old biotechnology student, went out to protest despite her father's pleas. Mortally wounded, she died in his arms, whispering, "Dad, I'm burning." A bright future stolen in a single night of terror. But the terror isn't over yet. It continues every day. Access to the internet remains completely blocked. And while the people of Iran are disconnected from the world, the regime continues its brutal killings. Today, the media is talking about a ceasefire. What ceasefire? There was no ceasefire in the Islamic Republic's war against the people of Iran. Checkpoints line almost every street. Regime thugs and their imported terrorists harass, beat, and murder innocent Iranians. For those who cry out against war and its costs, this is the war you should be talking about, the Islamic Republic's war against my compatriots. This war that goes on every day, far from the headlines of your Western newspapers and the minds of your television producers. But they are not far from my thoughts. My brave compatriots continue to resist. Many remain standing with broken bodies, but with an unbreakable will. They would rather die standing than live on their knees, and so would I. Churchill understood a people like this when he said, "Nations do not die when their soldiers fall. They only die when their spirit surrenders." I'm here to say the spirit of Iran has not surrendered and never will. Despite the brutality, the Islamic Republic is closer to collapse today than ever before, than at any time since 1979. And one fact is now beyond any dispute. The Iranian people will never accept a revamped version of this regime. Too much blood has already been shed. Too many graves have already been dug. The demand is not for a kinder jailer, the demand is for freedom. There is a military dimension to these events that this chamber is watching closely, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I tell you, whatever the course of the military operation currently on pause, whether it hastens the fall of the Islamic Republic or merely deepens the fractures within it, the outcome of the Iranian Revolution will not be determined by any external force. It will be determined by the Iranian people themselves. The revolution of the lion and the sun, the uprising that the people of Iran began in January with their own blood and courage, can never be interrupted or extinguished by any calculation by the regime, any diplomatic maneuver, or any military outcome. It was the people who took the first step, and it is the people who will finish it. If the military operation pushes the Islamic Republic into the historical abyss where it belongs, we will be there, ready, organized, and determined to build what comes next. And if the regime survives the immediate storm, we will continue the revolution until it is complete. We started this journey, and we will see it through to the end. History simply left us no other choice. When I look at Europe, I see ambivalence and a continued inability to see the reality of the streets of Iran. I'm disappointed but not surprised by the rush to engage with this criminal regime. The regime has murdered tens of thousands of its own citizens. The regime is sponsoring terrorism on the streets of Europe, including in Sweden. The regime is threatening and blackmailing European governments with hostages and violence. The Europe I believe in should defend human rights, democracy, and equality. It has a proud record in previous struggles, fighting against apartheid in South Africa, supporting the Solidarity movement in Poland, and now supporting the Ukrainians in their struggle for sovereignty. So why should Iran be any different? Are the human rights of Iranians less important? Is their life worth less? Maybe for some, but not for us. Unfortunately, this is nothing new. For decades, Europe has appeased and strengthened this terrorist regime. This has been a policy that helped this regime survive and kill its own people. I hope the Swedish government will pressure the European Union and other countries to support the people of Iran and their struggle for freedom. I am pleased and encouraged to see that so many members of the Riksdag from various parties are here today to hear a message from the people of Iran. On behalf of my compatriots who are silenced far too often, I thank you. Esteemed members of the Riksdag, this is no longer a matter of distant geopolitics. It is a security emergency on Swedish soil. The Swedish Security Service, SEPO, together with the Swedish Police Authority, has confirmed that the Islamic Republic of Iran is operating in Sweden through criminal intermediary networks. These are not just surveillance operations. They carry out acts of intimidation and violence against Jewish communities, Iranian dissidents, and Swedish citizens in general. On March 3rd of this year, shortly after it officially began, due to the current conflict in the Middle East, SEPO issued an urgent public alert about an increased threat level. This is not speculation, this is a statement from their own security services. And that's what makes this situation particularly corrosive. The criminal networks that Tehran uses do not cease to exist between missions. They are embedded in Swedish society. They are the same networks already identified as a major internal threat to public security. Sweden responded with determination. You restricted visas for employees of the Iranian embassy. You prosecuted Hamid Nouri for crimes against humanity under universal jurisdiction, setting a historic precedent. But that didn't last. Sweden sent Nouri back to Tehran, where he was welcomed as a hero by his fellow murderers. While he was able to return and brag about his crimes on state television, Dr. Ahmad Reza Jalili was forced to continue suffering in the regime's torture chambers. It's been 10 years since he was taken, and he is still captive. Decisions like this encourage the regime to take even more hostages, commit crimes, and aggressively challenge the entire world. A French senator told me a few months ago, our governments have become hostages to our own hostages. But governments still have the full choice of whether or not to give in to this blackmail. Václav Havel once said, the only genuine security in the world is security rooted in truth. The fundamental reality is that as long as this regime continues to hold power, Sweden and the free world will never be fully secure. Why did Sweden join NATO? Because of Putin's wars of aggression against Ukraine. That decision was correct and necessary. Let's not forget that the Islamic Republic is not a bystander in Russia's war. Tehran supplied drones and missile technology to Moscow. Weapons made in Iran have hit Ukrainian cities. The regime's technical cooperation has sustained Putin's ability to wage war against a democratic neighbor. As President Zelensky and I discussed and affirmed together, the Russian threat to Europe and the threat from the Islamic Republic to Europe are not two separate problems. They are two manifestations of a single challenge. Now, Sweden is part of NATO's collective defense. But collective defense is not just military, it is political, economic, and moral. It requires democratic nations to recognize threats in their entirety and also to recognize the Islamic Republic's support for Russian aggression as the direct security concern that it truly is. Now allow me to speak not of present dangers but of future possibilities. The relationship between Sweden and Iran has deep roots. In the early decades of the 20th century, Swedish experts and companies built strong ties with Iran. During the celebration of 2,500 years of Iranian civilization in Persepolis, Sweden was represented by then Prince and heir Carl Gustaf. His Majesty and I were sitting side by side, and we talked about the future of our nations and peoples. That future, with a democratic Iran, would change the security calculus of the entire region and Europe. This would immediately dismantle the proxy networks operating on Swedish soil. This would put an end to the hostage diplomacy that has poisoned relations with Western nations for decades. There would be cooperation in intelligence and the rule of law. It would cease its support for Russia's war machine. It would guarantee Europe's energy needs for decades to come. It would emerge as a natural and strategic partner, a nation of 90 million people with extraordinary human capital, a rich and vibrant civilization, and the desire to rebuild itself after decades of poor administrative management. Sweden has every reason to be part of that future. Its excellence in information technology and digital infrastructure, its defense industry, Saab's world-class capabilities in aerospace and defense, its engineering heritage through Volvo and Scania, its commitment to culture, its tradition of precision manufacturing and industrial innovation. All of this is exactly what a rebuilding Iran will need. This is not charity. This is a partnership between equals, between nations with complementary strengths and shared interests. Values? At this historic moment, when Iranians are asking me to help lead a democratic transition, I reaffirm the commitment I have made throughout my life to serve as a unifying, nonpartisan national figure, not as someone aspiring to power, but rather as a facilitator of stability, national unity, and a peaceful transition to a democratic government. I'm not the only one who believes this is possible. Together with economists, legal experts, security professionals, and civil society leaders from across the Iranian political spectrum, we have developed detailed transition frameworks. The Iran Prosperity Project to ensure institutional continuity and prevent instability, and to enable a rapid national recovery after the end of the regime. There is a plan. There is a way. There is a responsible alternative. Even within the state apparatus, the fractures are deepening. Reports indicate that members of the armed forces and security institutions are increasingly refusing to follow orders to participate in violence against civilians. Many have quietly signaled where their true loyalty lies, with the nation, not with those who repress it. When the way opens up, I am confident that they will act. Truly, no government can survive when it loses the willingness of its own institutions to enforce repression. We are approaching that moment. Allow me to conclude, dear members of the Riksdag, with what I believe to be the simplest and most important truth in this speech. The Iranian people are not asking you to fight for their revolution. They are already risking their lives doing that on their own with a courage that should humble us all. They are asking for something much more modest. Do not legitimize those who oppress them. Do not empower those who terrorize them. Protect those who have sought refuge among you and prepare for the day when Iran will be free. There are certain moments in history when neutrality simply isn't an option. It's a decision. When caution isn't prudence, it's complicity. When history silently presents a question and waits with terrible patience for an answer. Churchill faced this moment in 1940. Václav Havel faced it in 1989. Zelensky faces it today. And in their own brave way, even without planes, without armies, without any diplomatic immunity, the people of Iran are facing all this oppression in every street, in every prison cell, and in every unmarked grave. The Iranian people have responded. They responded in the streets and in their prisons. They responded with their lives. They chose freedom. History now asks the democratic world a fundamental and very simple question, directed especially to the nations of Europe. Will you stand with free peoples, or will you choose to accommodate those who oppress them? Future generations will not read your statements. They will judge your actions. They will not ask what you said, but rather what you did and what you refused to do when it mattered. And in the near future, and I say this not just as a feeling, but as a strategic conviction, when Iran is finally free, when its people are once again among the free nations of the world, when its children inherit a whole country, without fear, we will all know that this was in fact the great moment. When history changed at the exact moment when a great people refused to kneel, at the moment when free nations chose not to look away. Let it be forever recorded that when that historic day arrived, Sweden was fully ready. When the Iranian people rose up for freedom, Sweden stood by their side. Thank you.